You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A Radiant Creator isn't making a living, they are living.
How you doing?
How are
Doing
you?
good.
Hey, nice to meet you, Aaron.
Nice to meet you too.
I'm so glad you're on the interview.
I am too. I usually don't do interviews, so that's saying something.
Neither do I. So we're both newbies.
Yeah.
Oh. All right.
Well, it's a pleasure. Good
Yes.
to see you too, Craig.
Yeah, I'm at it.
Is the audio okay from my end as far as you're concerned?
We hear you good.
Yeah.
How about us?
Okay.
Do you hear us okay?
You can hear us?
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Everything's good.
All right. Well, welcome to Radiant Creators, Duncan Laurie. This is part 2, or more like just a little bit of an ongoing discussion. And let me bring you back there. You disappeared. Okay, there you are. And check out DuncanLaurie.com while you are listening. If you want to see more about him while we're chatting, it's Duncan Laurie, DuncanLaurie.com. And of course, we're Radiant Creators. It's all there. So here we are. Thanks for being on again, Duncan Laurie. Aaron's here.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you. It's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've been going through this. It is dog-eared and highlighted.
Well, I'm glad it's of use to you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in this book, it took you mentioned like 15 years to write, so I imagine it wasn't a daily process of creating it, but as we go through it, it's one of those books that you can read it cover to cover, and that's fine, but you're still going to feel like, oh, I'm only just beginning to get this. So that's why we have, highlighted and dog-eared, and we go back to different sections. And so one thing we didn't really talk about too much the first time we chatted was your process of writing the book. What was that process? How did that all start? And what was that 15 years like?
Well, the book is really a commentary on other writers in large part, fused with some of my own experience that I picked up along the way as I was reading and experimenting. So the issue was, there are all these inventors that each one of them has done something extraordinary. It's been publicly denounced. In many cases, the practitioners themselves were subjected to jail time or just had their careers and their reputations destroyed. I mean, there's a lot of material in the lives of the people that I was studying that I needed to find out more about, both from other researchers and just through experiencing something of what they had gone through to achieve a radionic success with a radionic device. So that took time. It took time for me to assimilate what that all meant in terms of my rather normal intellectual biases. And it also took time for me to decide what it was I wanted to write about. The book was initially much longer. I broke it out into 2 different volumes, and only one was published. So there's just an awful lot of water over the falls.
Yeah. So how about the second volume? Is that something that might be released one day, or what state is that in?
Well, it's around. You can find it in various places. I'm not sure if it's up on our website. It could be. It was a story about a gentleman named John Norcine, who was you might call him the X-Files guy at Lockheed Martin. And he had access to an entirely different realm of knowledge and information that in a small part overlaid with radionics. But through my friendship with him, I began to understand what radionics was vis-a-vis modern scientific semiotics, and also in terms of where this type of information was being used in other quarters, not just by the radionic community that I was familiar with.
And how would you define radionics? Now, I know that's a bit of a tough question, and it's all sort of between the lines in the book, but one thing that we didn't actually clarify the first time we chatted is, what is your definition of radionics, and what is a radionics machine? So we'll start with something a little bit mundane, but we'll go from there.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like a simple question, but it's hard to answer. For instance, if you're a shaman and living in the jungles of Peru or Brazil, and you have a practice healing people, you may employ certain devices or certain techniques that are familiar to your tribe and to the people of the area. You might have a dance, you might have a flute, you might have herb concoction, you might have various different ceremonial tools that you use to, you might say, crack open a disease and find a cure for it, or allow nature to cure it spontaneously. So if you're a person in the 21st century Western culture, then you are looking at things from the point of view of science and technology, engineering, mathematics. So what the radionics inventors that I studied, which technically speaking, this field began in the early 20th century, which coincided with the dawn of electrical engineering and the beginning of modern allopathic medicine. So before that, homeopathy was very predominant in America and Europe. And that homeopathy is sort of like tuning a person's well-being using very, very minute trace elements of certain minerals and herbs and various combinations. So you can say about a homeopathic remedy that there's really virtually nothing in it, because it's been reduced so many times that there is not one molecule of the substance left in the remedy. So what's actually causing the change to take place in the individual that makes them well? Well, it's something that we don't really truly understand. And that's why it doesn't exist very much today in the scientific world. But for a long time, it was considered medicine. And I had a doctor who was at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, which was originally a homeopathic hospital. And I had the benefit of knowing a very good homeopathic doctor was also an MD. So I began to see these things in real life contexts. And I began to wonder what is going on? Why is there this disconnect between, you might call it indigenous medicine, homeopathic, herbal, vibrational, and the scientific worldview? So when radionics as a name appeared on the scene, it wasn't out of the blue. It came out of these earlier traditions. What the radio in radionics means is that the inventors started using electronic instruments to tune and to describe the various frequencies and signals that they were using in the curative process. So they invented machines. The minute they invented machines, in this case, they had radio components in them, early radio components, capacitors and resistors. The minute it started to look like a technology, then it entered the vernacular of the scientific world, not the science of the scientific world, just the engineering and application side of science. So they called it radionics because the best analogy for what they were doing was a radio broadcast, which would be you, the person with the instrument, broadcasting a curative frequency to me, subject of your work, and basically asking my body to produce the necessary chemicals and ingredients to combat the illness, return me to health. That's a little long-winded, but this is not an easy subject.
Oh no, it definitely isn't. And when we look at the cupolas, the stones that have artwork done on them, because you mentioned that the first time we chatted, and you begin to see those cupolas, and then you look at the dials of a radionics machine, there's something that feels very similar. It just seems like to me that they're the same thing, that these cupolas, and this is a hypothesis, but that same as a radionics machine, the cupolas that were carved into stone were machines that did things. They were intent, they were a machine made to continue broadcasting an intent, and then you went about hunting, or you went about living your life, whether it's a modern or an ancient radionics machine.
You want me to?
Yeah. I mean,
on that?
yeah.
Well, what I was trying to do in this book wasn't to make a scientific case for radionics. Like I say, it's a commentary. It was written because I feel that there's a lot of commonality between the techniques that a radionic practitioner, the ones that I studied and wrote about, there's commonality in the way they approach their task to art. And my background is art. I'm a sculptor. And I look at, and there's also such a thing as radio art today. So radio art gets even closer to what radionics is all about. So what I was trying to do was create a document that informed artists and creative people about the connection between these two fields. And in order to do that, I had to go back historically before the dawn of the instrumental radionic tradition, which is, we've practically gone through now. The modern radionics inventors don't use the word radionics. They don't want to be associated with that field because it's had such a terrible history. They create a new language to describe their techniques. But the commonality of the information processing that goes on, whether you're using an old-fashioned radionics device, a modern computerized form of radionics, or something from the ancient world, such as a cupule or a cave painting or some form of directed intent using symbol systems, there's the commonality is, to me, what's important here and what has value. So you don't have to completely rely on there being a scientific interpretation for what we're talking about any more than you have to rely on a painting having a scientific rationale. They're just apples and oranges. So if you approach it from that direction, as I did, then the normal caveats that limit people's willingness to look at something like this begin to disappear, because you're not holding the practitioner, the device, the technique, the procedure to the same standard that you would hold a scientist to in a laboratory. You're holding them to the standard that you would hold an artist to in the studio, which is a much more subjective approach to the to what they're doing that is based on consciousness. You see, it's based on manipulation and understanding of consciousness and the ability to reach out of your own consciousness into the field of another human being and find some way to help them relieve themselves of their malady. Is that what is that kind of what you're looking for here?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I know Erin had a question for you.
Well,
because it kind of fits right now.
It does kind of fit, because right now, as you know, as we've discussed, my art has changed from being very pop culture oriented, where I felt that I was dipping my pen in poisonous dark ink and creating, but getting a lot of attention. Whereas now I'm creating based on nature, and it's pretty much crickets. I don't have much of a social media presence, but I'm way more tapped in now. And I followed sort of the energetics of how it felt after I drew, say, Paris Hilton. You know, I always felt I felt lower after I posted those. And now that I'm painting, I could care less. I'm just painting these beautiful hummingbirds and gorgeous botanical, fantastical illustrations, and I'm much happier now. Am I tapped into something better, or do you have to make?
I don't think I have to tell you that, do I? You are. What I'd like to know is, what was the turning point? You see, this is really interesting. Suddenly, your attention is, you're working with, so if you think of this in terms of circuits, right? Like you're connecting with someone else, you're connecting through media with your audience, with the subject, and with yourself. At one point, you have a circuit going that is stirring up a lot of interest in social media, is what you've told me. And then suddenly, for no reason that I've heard yet, your attention shifted away from that and developed an alternative type of circuit that was with nature. Mm-hmm. So what was the turning point? You know, that's pretty interesting to me.
It didn't feel right. I really felt that I was finding inspiration in something that just wasn't feeding me. It wasn't engaging. And yet it gave me quite a bit of attention. And I had a lot of work, and I was in the New York Times Sunday, Arts and Leisure, 2-page spread of my work.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Get that up, right?
It was very hard to walk away from, but I just didn't feel good doing it. I did not feel good. I just felt that I've always loved nature, and that's what I think the true artist does, is sometimes you just have to, you can sell out, which is great. I know a lot of people, I see Instagram, I see a lot of people that are kind of stuck doing what they've always done because they have to make money. They could never walk away and start something different, you know? So
right.
Yeah, it wasn't that great. It wasn't an easy process.
No, and I admire you for taking the step. I mean, your work is beautiful that you're doing now.
Thank you.
It's rich, and it's full of sort of exotic symbolism, and it resonates probably really to a much larger audience. It's just a question of being able to reach them easier before, when you deal with a celebrity, versus reaching the group of people who are more or less invisible to you. You know, as you continue to grow, of course you'll find them, but
yeah,
I understand that this is pretty monumental, and it's important that people that are starting out in art, you know, they look very intimidated. You know, it's a bottleneck in the art world. You have only so many places to have gallery shows, and you have tons of artistic product being generated every day, and it has to find its way through this bottleneck and into a prescribed milieu that is not under your control. It's under the control of the people in the art establishment. So what about all these other artists that are either not comfortable doing this, like yourself, indefinitely, want to shift, want to find something else that is meaningful to them, and yet say, how am I going to get anywhere with this? Well, in the shamanic societies, like let's take a modern one, Navajo shamans, sand painters. Are you familiar with Navajo sand painting?
I always say I'm doing sand paintings. I go down
Oh,
to,
yeah?
if it blows away, if there's an EMP and I lose all my work, I'm good with that. I really
Right?
am.
So who does sand paintings? The Navajo and the Tibetans.
Mm-hmm.
The Tibetans do the Kala Chakra mandala, which I was at the first Kala Chakra ceremony performed by a Buddhist, by the Dalai Lama, really, in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere, for that matter. And so I saw it firsthand, which was fascinating. It was a 4-day process. And Navajo sand painting is more intimate. The Buddhist ceremony is designed to help the world. It's also a way of instruction to take people into themselves. Like a mandala is not a two-dimensional drawing the way we normally perceive it. It's actually three-dimensional. It's like a house. And what the different components of the mandala are rooms, and the rooms are places we occupy in our being. So the Buddhist teacher, the Lama, will take you from room to room through the rooms characterized in the mandala and teach you what they are, what they mean, and how to best integrate them into your psyche, and thereby making you whole, not living just in one room of your house, but living in the whole house. So Navajo sand painting is more directly curative. It's not a cosmological process or a societal process as much as it is one-on-one. The Navajo will take the individual that needs healing, and while he's creating this diagrammatic form out of colored sand on the floor of his hogan, he will sing, he will chant, he will invoke atmosphere that allows for the individual being healed to reach a state where a spontaneous event can occur, a spontaneous remission of disease. Even though the healer is doing it, it still has to take place outside of him in the individual he's treating. And it's an artistic process. It's a design. It's the creation of a design. And when, in both cases, both the Tibetan mandala and the sand painting, at the end, it's the painting is destroyed, which means it's not created as a commodity. It's not something that's going to be sold next week in New York. It's something that, in the Tibetans, take all the sand and they put it in a river, and they allow the energy of the painting to flow through the river into the world, into the environment. So it has a healing capacity that it goes much further afield than just an individual. But even in the individual's case, the sand is broken up, and with the breaking up, so is the disease. So it's a metaphorical overlay, in a sense. Now, if you were a young artist that didn't want to become commercially successful, as in your case, you didn't want to dip yourself into popular culture beyond a certain point, what are your alternatives? We're not taught there are any alternatives. You go to art school, you're taught the history of art. Artists have galleries. Artists have dance floors. Artists have performance spaces. If you're not willing to participate in those venues, then you're out of luck. But what Radionics is telling you is that there's this other tradition, this hidden tradition, that gives an artist with this type of talent, the talent to look within themselves for meaning, share that with others through various procedures that they alone are capable of creating, right? So you don't have to take my version of radionics and as the truth. You take yours. You find your way of doing this. You do your experiments. You talk to your plants, and you talk to your patients, and you talk to your friends, and you begin to intuitively emerge from this with a sense of your own being as it relates to the other person, to the nature, to the world, to the, and this is a whole different approach to art. It's not materialistic. It's not driven by commerce. And that's what I was really trying to write between the lines in The Secret Art. It's truly secret because even though you can find it, you can study it, it's still invisible, right? Why is it invisible? People caught on to homeopathy. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. So why is this type of art invisible? You see? That's why it's great to talk to you, because you've actually entered this domain in your own personal journey. Am I correct?
Well, I hadn't known that I did it until I talked to you on the phone that time. And after I spoke with you, I was extremely inspired. I sort of had a new way of looking at my art. So I thank you for that. Isn't it funny how just one small little thing could open me up? But that's what happened is after I spoke on the phone with you.
Well,
I saw it differently.
I'm glad to hear it, and I'm glad that our conversation had that effect for you, because
yes.
I would like to see you be able to communicate that to someone else and have the same door open for them, and so on and so forth. And it becomes a geometric progression,
mm-hmm.
right? It's something that we all kick it over, and suddenly people are thinking along this way. And you know what? It brings peace. A lot
mm-hmm.
of these other activities bring rancor. They bring bad energy, as you put it.
Mm-hmm.
But these kind of things bring inner peace and make you feel good and make the people around you feel good, right? So that's why we're on this blog, because you want other people to know about this, to know this
mm-hmm.
is for real.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to know it's for real if somebody doesn't tell them? You have permission to do it this way. You don't have to worry about, being in Gagosian Gallery in New York. You can find another way to make art that's perfectly legitimate for your own audience.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I agree.
And yeah, while I was reading through the book, that was one of the things that I noted for kind of an intention while we were talking, was just to get that across, that as I wrote it was, artists can be inspired to make art again, that change, purify the external dynamics. And that's a transformational experience of a transformational experience of consciousness is demonstrated that isn't a product. And so that's, I'm glad that we're getting that across.
Yeah, I mean, so much art of well, there was a big deal in the 60s when artists began making monumental earthworks. Richard Serra, people made objects that could not be sold. They were just features of the world, and maybe you could sell a picture of it, or you could talk about it in terms of the history of art, but suddenly it wasn't a commodity anymore. It was something else. And these individuals that began doing this often had a sense of the cosmology behind it. And today it hasn't stopped. I mean, there are a lot of this going on. but it's still seen within the context of fine art and the structure of the commercial world around art. What I'm talking about is not necessarily ignoring that aspect of it, because everybody's got to make a living somehow, but you have to see if the product that's coming out of your efforts is actually influencing the world that you live in a more spontaneous way that goes beyond just your ego desires as an artist. And this is, I'm not explaining this terribly well, I have to say, but
That's fine.
I understand it.
Yeah, we just work at it. No, you're doing perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that you know, I've been, and I like the idea of environmental art, which is something that you can start making in your own space. Now, not everybody's going to have the resources to go get a bulldozer and earth equipment and start and have somebody give them the land and the opportunity to make a spiral jetty or a solar observatory in the desert, right? But everybody can start with the space they live in and think of the space they live in as a tuned cavity. So if you know that if your room gets dirty, if your house gets dirty, if things aren't feeling clean, you'll feel discomfort. And when you clean it up and you order it again, your space gets brighter, your mental facilities improve as a result of just doing this directed intent of putting your environment into a better condition than it was when you started. Now, if you expand that a little bit and you think about the selection of objects in your room, do you really like that pillow, or is that pillow annoy you? You know, right? Do you really want that? Do you really want that couch against that wall? You know, these are all directed intents. These are intents that are directed at you creating a mirror, the most perfect mirror that you can within your own environment. So when I started experimenting with this, and I had friends, I had a friend named Chris Hales, no longer with us, but he lived in New York. And do you know how when they're building a new building in New York, they excavate down about a story or two and you have this rubble field that's below ground level and it's fenced off and you look down in there and there's just nothing down there? Well, he would go down into these spaces and he would start organizing that area. He would he would remove trash, he would remove objects that he found irritating and annoying and representative of disharmony. And he would harmonize these abandoned spaces or these yet to be used spaces and create parks out of them. I mean, he was squatting in a building in New York and in other places. And he did the same thing in the abandoned building, and the same thing everywhere he went. He would begin to create an environment of beauty and harmony out of a chaotic and potentially dangerous environment that was there before. So this is a way, and people would be attracted to these places. They would come in, they'd start planting a little garden, or they'd begin to improve on it. They'd take it and turn it into a community park because they'd see all of a sudden it wasn't just an abandoned field filled with trash. It now had something positive about it. And therefore it stimulated people to take it to the next level. beyond what he could do, and he'd go somewhere else and do it again. And this could be abandoned, like I say, this was in abandoned houses on 14th Street, New York, in various different other locations. So what is he doing? He was tuning the cavities that he entered. A tuned cavity is kind of a radionic idea that if your body is a tuned cavity, if your brain is a tuned cavity, and it goes out of alignment for one reason or another, because you're not in harmony with yourself, you're going to wind up with some disease. This is sort of a basic hypothesis of energy medicine. And if you begin tuning your body through your environment, objectifying it, making it a mirror for yourself, a feedback loop, what Gurdjieff used to call reciprocal maintenance, then you begin to address things that are in your subconscious without hardly knowing it. Because art is a process also of revealing us to ourselves. We have to look at our work that we create and ask ourselves, where is this coming from? What is its meaning to us? And where do we go from here? It's a complete form of consciousness introspection, which has the benefit of elevating us, right? Elevating us into a different space that we didn't occupy before. So this can be done by anybody. You see, you don't have to be particularly artistic to do this. And that's why I say, this is what I was thinking about when I started working on my studio, which you said you wanted me to talk a little bit about.
Yes, Dragonline Studio.
So, do you want me to segue into this, or do you have any other question about what I've been saying so far, or any further?
Actually, let's cruise into Dragonline Studios, because a lot of powerful things happen there. You guys had quite the operation going for a while, and let's talk about that. And there's some things that we can circle back to, but let's just flow into Dragonline Studio. You have an amazing building that is the envy of anyone. Does that still exist? Do you still spend time there?
I'm not there now, or I'd show it to you. I'm in Maine, but yes, it's still there, and it does exist. And what I want to say about it is that I was fortunate enough to inherit a site, or part of a site, of an earlier building that had been torn down in the late 60s, but it was on a remarkable piece of land that juts out into Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, at the mouth of Narragansett Bay. And I grew up on this site. I grew up partially in the building that was torn down, and I frequented, so I've been in contact with this area my entire life. And it had tremendous meaning to me. And when I actually inherited a piece of this site, it's larger than just what I own, I wanted to make something there that reflected the notions that I was just describing to you. I'd come out of New York, I'd come out of other experiences with the tools to do this. I just wasn't quite sure what form it would take. So back around 1990, I had been studying sacred geometry, and sacred geometry exists in all forms of design, both in nature and in human art, and it also is predominantly found in architecture. So I started believing that I had been taught that in sacred architecture, you have a proportional system that links human consciousness to the cosmos. So you have the ratio of 1 to 1618, which is called the golden mean. And many sacred buildings are built around the sacred mean. The nautilus shell that everybody loves, that beautiful spiraling form, is another way to describe the same ratio. And when nature is operating without constraints, meaning environmental constraints, growth of leaves, growth of branches and trees, all kinds of growth proceeds according to these specific ratios when that area where that plant is growing is in harmony. And this is what sacred geometry means. I was lucky enough to be friends with an author named John Michel, Englishman, who wrote a tremendous amount about sacred geometry and basically introduced it to the lay public starting in the 1960s. What John was able to do for me was make me aware that if you employ these ratios, you're building a connection between human consciousness, the cosmos, and nature. So I had a very wild site. I mean, the energy there was wild before I started building. The whole notion of building a sacred geometric structure on a powerful spot in the environment is that you want all that energy to become organized and to the benefit of the people that are using that structure, that building. So if you build a church, let's say, with sacred proportions on the remnants of an earlier structure, like a Druid structure or a primitive place of worship on the landscape, it was put there because people recognized something important was going on at that spot on the earth. So the idea is you build a structure that acts like a transceiver. The geometry is the tuning mechanism. The subject is your consciousness. And what nature does by infusing that space, tuning that space, is it provides the necessary motive force to empower you, the occupant of the space, to operate at your best, at your highest level of creativity or purpose, right? So if a church is built with geometric proportions and the music in the church is designed around the same proportions, the people participating in the church, the life of the church, will come there on a Sunday, bent out of shape from their work week, not necessarily in a harmony with themselves or their world. They will be exposed to the beauty of the church, both aesthetically, sonically, through the music, through the architecture. The space will infuse them with meaning. The words of the sermons or the religious texts will give meaning, intellectual meaning to those feelings. And as a result, when they leave, the whole procedure produces stability in society. It doesn't, instead of promoting chaos, the sacred structure brings harmony back into people. So this is what I learned from John Michel. This is how he described to me, what the intuitive meaning of this process is. So you can see the overlay between a sacred structure designed around these proportional systems, the idea of a tuning device like a radionic device that's used curatively, and what we have as an aesthetic experience that is nurturing, not just for the individuals, but for all of mankind that frequent this experience and then try to bring it forward into their lives. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about this artistically, aesthetically. So when I built this studio, the rudiments were simply the ratio of 1 to 1618 or to 618 to 1, or and then you find a metric. We, instead of using the foot, we use the sacred cubit because it made a bigger, fatter looking rectangle. I wanted a different type of space than what you would envision in the long, narrow churches of antiquity. So there's a lot of room, and there are other sacred ratios besides the golden mean. So we use those in window design, and we use other features of this. But it was very, very simple. I mean, all you have to do is describe a length, a width, and a height in order to achieve this type of room. And then you can go smaller things within that. So if you were looking at the Nautilus shell, it would circle in this rectangle. The sides and the way the decay of the Nautilus shell to the center would occur would be nested in a whole bunch of different little sacred geometric rectangles. So it really does get this feeling of, this is something powerful going on here. This is more than just a metaphor. This is an energetic reality. And when we built the studio, it was an experiment. It's like, yeah, is this just a lot of jargon, or can I build something like this, test it out in the environment, and see if it performs as claimed? And that's exactly what we did. We built this, my wife and I and my friends that contributed. We had virtually no money to do this, so we used a lot of salvage. It took a very long time. We started in 1990. It's only today reached a modicum of sort of respectability. It was a work in progress for a long time. I used it as a studio. I wasn't living there. So, but the experience attracted other people, and among them were if you go to the website, you can see the individuals, these composers and musicians and videographers. Todd Thill, who designed our website and who was the aesthetic designer of the secret art, wonderful creative genius that played a big role in our life. And Steve Nalepa, a music composer who is practicing in Los Angeles today, and it brought many, many individuals over to this space just to play with the radionics instruments that we had there, do experiments, make the crossover into musical composition and visual art. So it became a meeting point and a way of informing other artists about the ideas that I'm talking to you about today. And that went on for many, many years, and to an extent is still going on today.
And, oh my goodness, that was amazing. So you knocked my train of thought right off. That was perfect.
How did you come up with the name Dragon Line?
The Dragon Line is like in England, the sacred spots on the landscape are connected by lines called ley lines. The same cosmology exists in the Far East, except they're called dragon lines. So the dragon line is the actual energy conduit between powerful spots on the landscape. So just like you would have a bright light in one place, you would have a void somewhere else, or you would have a connection. You see the the telephone maps, right, of the United States. Here are all the points of light connected by all the lines, right? That's like a metaphor for, except we're talking about earth energy here, telluric energy. We're talking about the kind of energy that are used in these curative ceremonies and employed by artists to make objects with great feeling and emotional content. So
That would explain Sedona. Arizona here attracts a lot of artists because there's a ley line that runs up through there and apparently has energetic vortexes.
well, I've never been there, and I do recognize that this whole concept has been extremely overhyped, but nevertheless, you know, for a lot of people to take some benefit from it, you must assume something's going on, right? It's got to be revealing itself somehow to people.
Yeah, well, I think there is in Sedona, especially, there is an element of tourist. They've got to keep that alive. Oh, this is where all the vortexes are. But if you do go to certain places there, you'll find that where they say the energy is coming out of isn't actually where it is. You can feel, if you're sensitive to it, where that energy is coming from, and you can guide yourself towards that. So it's not necessarily where they say it is, but Sedona
Right.
is a very powerful place.
Wow.
And the energy
Did that
moves.
influence you? Does having access to this sort of thing factor into your transformation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very pure energy, especially being here in the desert. The sort of energy is, I always call it like sword energy, because there's so many things that can poke you and it's very hot. And you look out and you just see
Did you
such
say
vastness.
Sword energy?
And sword, like a sword, very sharp.
sword. Okay.
Sword,
Yeah.
like a very sharp knife. Everything has
Yeah.
spikes on it, and it's very pure here. There's no lushness and leaves and things to get in your way. It's all very pure and in front of you. So it is it helped me open up quite a bit too. Yeah.
That's how I have a friend named Jerry Vassalatos who wrote a lot about earth energy, and that's exactly the way he described it, as almost the way you see these crystals that form with these long and beautiful spikes on it. So yeah, I get it completely. It's a
Yeah.
nice way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
think one of these got into you and that's what happened? I'm still trying to get to the bottom of this.
I think I think so. I just think I've always lived among forests and lushness, and I lived in Seattle for a long time with a lot of rainforest. And you come here and there's no trees. It's very hot. Everything is very pure and in your face. There's no escaping it. So when you're walking around, there's just heat radiating on you. You can see for a long way. And you can see the Fibonacci sequence and everything, the way the cactus grows and everything. You can just see it, where it's a little bit more hidden in the forest, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does, but at least it does for me.
I see that beautiful piece of jewelry you're wearing too. It has those very spikes of light that you're discussing.
Spikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that Arizona moving here did have a bit of an impact on that as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sedona, it feels like it has the toroidal energy, I guess you could say. When you're talking about decorating your house as really almost a radionic tuning, it makes sense, because I think it's really important for people to realize is that what you find important is important. And so making your home beautiful, you can see how that radiates out, and that helps everyone. So it's important to pursue what interests us. And along with that tuning, I know you can find them in Ireland and other parts of Europe, but Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, who wrote Secret Life of Plants, they also wrote Secrets of the Soil, and they wrote about how they would dig a well and they would put, rocks up a stone hole, then they would build it up, and then they would fill it with dirt, and they would actually tune these towers, these hollow towers they would make. And these things are thousands of years old, some people think, because what it would do is actually they were tuning these towers by digging a hole in the ground, and then you fill it up to a certain extent with dirt, and they would tune it to actually pull in the ionosphere and make a toroidal energy flow that would then, all the crops around these towers would actually grow better. And they knew
Yeah.
where to make them, how often you needed them. And so there you go. Your home can be that same toroidal energy that you create that just radiates through your neighborhood.
I've also heard that if you think of these towers as like a syringe, right? And depending on how much fluid is in the syringe, depends on the effect that the injection is going to have on the patient, right? So if the fluid we're talking about is some form of cosmic energy, then filling these tubes with sand, which is what they did, would create different types of experiences, not just in the landscape, but also inside the structure. And I've heard that there was a certain way of filling them that a woman who was giving birth could be brought into this structure with the right amount of earth, and it would facilitate the birth process, make it more organically compatible and less terrifying, right? Have you heard
Wow.
that about them?
I had never heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the person who wrote about this a lot. They're one of the people who frequented the Radionics conventions, talked about this at some length at one time, I heard. So I'll try to pull that name out of my not terribly, my old brain.
What's something I would throw out there for you guys? I think this is fun. Something that we mentioned when we talked before is how thousands of years of European architecture and art has turned to poop in a few generations. And turned to poop. And one of the things that I get within the book is that artistic expression that one is seeking for, that inspiration, ultimately maybe the same energy that radionics works, that actually is, that we are reversing that. It's a time to get back on track. Because I know that's one thing that you often talk about, is how you see art today and you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And I know it's something that Duncan Laurie notices too.
It upsets me.
Yeah.
I feel like people are creating what they think they should create. And I'm seeing a lot of sameness and just, there's no passion in it.
Yeah.
A lot of the music and that sort of thing. So I wondered what happened, how that happened.
Well, I mean, social media, you started out the first interview asking me what effect social media and technology has on subjective experience, on the human psyche. And I can't say that we have the answer to that entirely, but being the father of 3, I noticed how compelling the devices are and how addictive they are. So if we're constantly referencing something outside of ourselves and we're expecting meaning from it, like you said, with social media, you're constantly engaged in the world outside and how its nuances are affecting people emotionally, let's say, then you lose touch with yourself and your own connection to your spirit, which is in turn connected to nature. So we're living increasingly in artificial environments, and we're entertaining ourselves with artificial stories that created for in music and in film and in the news, right? So we increasingly are distancing ourselves from any form of internal satisfaction pleasure has to come through our senses into ourselves instead of coming out of ourselves and going out through our senses and being something we give to other people. And face it, it just creates schisms in the way people operate. I mean, we become unnecessarily competitive. We become cruel. We ignore the animals that we we treat them inhumanely, right? And as a food source. I mean, it just goes on and on. So it's part of a larger picture that just is the result of lack of self-understanding, what I would call just simple being. We're just afraid to just say no to all of this. It's very addictive.
It is. It just seems like you're always looking at things through this black mirror.
Yeah,
You're interpreting life through this black mirror. We've actually put Ahriman on our screen. If you can, this is on here, but
Here we go.
Is you going to tell me about that weird form that's on my page and on your website?
which one? Yeah, Ahriman.
Oh, Ahriman.
We put Ahriman on here. We have this on our phone to remind us that every time we look at this phone, that we are sucking, our energy is being sucked out, so to speak.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah,
because we become so addicted to it. You get your information and everything through it, and so it's a process that Craig and I have committed to stop. That's why I put this ugly thing on here.
You go. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Ahriman. I've only heard that term through Rudolf Steiner.
That's where we got it.
Where it's from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so and the black square being Saturnian, being a representation of Saturn, and then Ahriman basically he is sitting there on Saturn and he's trying to, pull you into that eighth sphere as they call it, and so we just remind ourselves whenever we look at this, we go, oh, that's the truth,
Right.
and it makes you go, okay,
You have to go to drastic measures in order to overcome your addiction. You really do, and you have to see that it's an addiction. It takes some time for that, and so we're in the process now.
We have to find out the real challenge is to find out what about this becomes nurturing to other people as opposed to consuming. Right? If it's consuming your energy, then you're being drained by the technology and the forces involved in it. On the other hand, if there's a nurturing aspect to it, then the way there is in all art, then obviously we want to become aware and make selections that are going to give us something from this and not just help us become its victim.
And Aline McCusick, who we just had on the show, we talked to her, and she's a biofield energy tuner. She works.
I saw the picture of her. Yeah.
Yeah, she works that kind of healing, and I started working with the tuning forks, and I can say that you definitely it's a very real thing, and the person has to experience it themselves, and they realize this is real. And one of the things.
Did she do this to you personally? Did she give you a treatment?
She hasn't done a treatment for me personally, but I've done them for others. I just
You
begun
do it.
to.
You do it yourself?
He's learning. He's learning.
You're learning the techniques.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm learning it, and
So tell me about it.
well, the biofield is basically the let's say the toroidal energy. It is the energy field of the body, and it goes out a few inches, and it also goes out a few feet. And especially the heart center actually has a greater radius than the brain does. And so, let's say our Aboriginal ancestors, they were very in tune with their heart center. So when they walked through the woods, when they're walking through nature, they were feeling it in a much more conscious way. And right now we're very, very pulled in. We don't really feel so well. Our instincts aren't quite as turned on. Well, the biofield of our bodies, that energy field, it carries ancestral trauma and memories. It can carry trauma, especially from our birth, from when we were still in the womb, and then all through our lives. And so she mapped the biofield of the body, and others have done this too, but it seems that one side and the other will hold different things. And as you get good at combing the biosphere, the biosphere of the body, that you begin to literally, when you run into something that is blocked there, when someone has something that is in their biosphere that is not healthy, that is a trauma, that is a negative energy in their biofield, when you run into it, it stops you. It's literally like pushing the forks into Jello. Mm-hmm. And you feel it, and then you can hear the change in the forks. And so that's basically what it is. And then when you find those, you get better at letting those intuitively tell you what they are and what they're about. And then through her training thousands of people at this point, others do this, but she's, I think, probably one of the better people doing it. After she trains thousands of people, the accuracy just begins to speak for itself, because people will say, oh, I feel this, what was going on at this time in your life, at this age, what was going on around these things. Then you can take that, you can loosen it up, and you can push it back into the corresponding body center, chakra, to be dissolved. And it almost seems counterintuitive at first. You think, well, wouldn't you want to toss it out? But no, you actually pull it back in where it can be absorbed and dissolved and worked on. And so that's something.
That falls into the greater description of radionics, because it's a diagnostic methodology, a tuning, also a treatment methodology. It's something where you enter a person's energy field with a type of instrument in order to detect something that is gone out of harmony. When the harmony's there, there's no resistance. You see, when it's just like a muscle spasm. The muscle spasm is a knot of energy, and you have to rub it and massage it and get it loosened up again before you can walk, right? If it's your back. But so it's very similar. You see, we can easily visualize this in the musculature, but it's a little harder to accept that this could also be taking place in an energy field around the body, which could respond to such simple and non-invasive techniques. You see, there's no harm done in any of this. There's no wrong way of doing it, because you're simply rubbing someone's back energetically and softening things up. And once it gets softened up again, the body kicks in and restores the muscle to its own correct equilibrium. And that's the basis of radionics. It's not like an invasive thing at all. It shouldn't be, at least. It can be used that way, I might add, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, well, something that Elaine McCusick that we talked to mentioned, and it reminds me of what you guys were just talking about, was she has a rule that it is important to only speak truth, always be truthful, and only be truthful. And that can be challenging for many people. I mean, like, a lot of relationships would end, people would, it can cause havoc in a person's life if one day you start being honest, Yeah. So she says you need to work on always being truthful. And then along with that, something I kind of extrapolated from that was, it is good to also only see truth. Because if you say something untruthful, then if you're doing like muscle testing, you'll feel that weakness. You'll feel, the truth is strong, untruth is not strong. It makes you weaker. And so ultimately, it seems like with the social media and how art has changed, what you guys were talking about, that when we view untruth, and we are constantly, if you're looking at the mainstream media, if you're looking at just the world right now, so much is untruth, and it's weakening us. So it seems like, along with always being truthful, if you want to have that healthy biosphere, you need to actually only speak truth, but don't allow yourself to hear untruths. Don't take part in it.
Don't engage in it.
Don't engage in it, because it creates a circuit.
Sometimes it's not possible to see the truth. But when you expose a lie, the result is the truth. See, so if something is, the truth can be hidden. And how do you find the hidden truth? You can't just, it wouldn't be hidden if it was easy to see, right? So sometimes you actually have to confront the lies and call them for what they are. And even though you don't know yourself what the truth is, when you peel back a lie, you feel you're getting closer to it, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of also what takes place in the work aspect of these healing methodologies, is that if in psychotherapy, let's say a person has a buried trauma and you're the doctor and you know it's there, it's just a question of how do you access it? How do you get the person to speak it themselves, to put it on the table, right? And you know, when as soon as they do, there'll be this flush of relief. There'll be a sense of, wow, I've let that go, and I didn't even know I was holding it, right? So we have this very visible in mental therapies, but we don't think of it the same way in terms of our bodies, in terms of our psyche.
Yeah, because it was a good number of years ago, but I had a experience like that, and it's one of the things that turned me on to the tuning fork work and the biosphere work was I was at a stuck point in life, and then I was half asleep, and I saw this big, basically a ray of light entered me, a silvery cone of like a little tornado, and it cleared out places where I was stuck. And I felt like
I
I
mean,
was
it was a whirlwind
yeah,
form?
a whirlwind, and it was kind of silvery gray, and it just boom appeared, and I could hear there was somebody or beings doing this for me, and I think maybe it was an experience I had in the future, or it's hard to really express, but it was as if I should have been sleeping through it. I wasn't really supposed to become awake, but I did wake up, and I went, oh my heavens, and it felt like an energetic operation, but there was, imagine Novocaine, so you could feel this energy being cleared out of you, but it wasn't painful. Maybe it wouldn't have been painful, but
Yeah,
in
you
a
know,
way, yeah.
I really relate to that. I don't know if you saw anything on the website about the tourbillon, the art images I did around the tourbillon. A tourbillon, in my context, isn't a piece of a watch. It's a whirlwind of fire. And I mean, in the Bible, you have this notion of the whirlwind of fire, right? In the Old Testament, God's voice spoke out of the whirlwind of fire. And but in my case, it was a very visual phenomena that I encountered on a number of occasions, that had, I felt like first I saw the tourbillon in the distance, and as I kept having more experiences of it, I kept getting closer to it, and not, it's like suddenly it's coming towards me, or am I going towards it? Something really, and I made a whole series of artworks around this, that were actually the visual representation of what I actually saw in these visions. But that's one of the things that woke me up to the artistic side of this energetics, is that you do see visual representations of things like whirlwinds. They do come into your body, do things that you're completely spontaneously, they do that. You don't call them, you don't ask this to happen. Comes in spontaneously, it does affect you, and you actually can render the experience. You just described it. And I said, wow, I know what that is.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Oh wow. Yeah, and then like the same day life changed. I just changed life direction. Everything changed, you know. And it was,
Everything changes. Yeah.
yeah, and I was stuck, and I knew I was stuck, but I didn't know how much I was stuck. But that helped me, because you can do therapy forever, that's fine. But then when something comes in and goes, we're just going to take this energy and we're just going to clear it out and help you process it, and boom, then
Like an explosion, right?
like an explosion, and you realize, oh, well, that's much better. And it's an incredible relief, because you go, it's instant change. It's almost like your life changes, where you had things that were concrete, fossilized reality that you did not want, that all of a sudden became just,
Concept.
yeah, just now your inspiration. Inspiration replaces that. And maybe you couldn't have done something yesterday, but now you can do it. And you really couldn't fake that. And you go, wow, I'm a different person. I have this different energy. I can do things I could not do. And there's no way I could have done this, you say, like 4 hours ago or 20 minutes ago. This is a new existence.
Yeah, I mean, in mystical literature, consciousness is perceived as sort of like a universal fluid that flows among all sentient beings. And it's not a personal experience at all, that flows into us, and we identify it with a body, and then we take credit for it, right? But it's not us at all. And the more that credit making, credit taking process encumbers our lives, then the more we create this ego that becomes our impediment to the free-flowing nature of the energy, as it was when we were born, and as it is throughout life, if you see it as in this kind of pantheistic way that I'm describing, right?
Yes.
So yeah, something has to break down that shell that we build around ourselves that creates this autonomous being that is no longer connected to every other being through consciousness. There has to be some kind of dynamite that gets into that in order to make things change. That's part of what the radionic, the metaphorical aspect of radionics is, as I'm trying to describe it for art, is that artists that employ these energies responsibly, and I'm saying responsibly, very big part of this, have the capacity to create energetic events that free up bound energy, and therefore empower people to be who they really are, more than what they are told they are, what they have limited themselves to be through their other experiences.
Well, that's what you did for me when I talked on the phone with you, just that brief amount of time. I was running out the door. Craig gives me the phone. I talk to you, and there was just some kind of exchange, energetic exchange that occurred, and I felt different. It was just that I don't even.
It's not me. It's our consciousness, the consciousness doing what it wants to do for us, right? Which is part of that leads into the personal aspect of the interview. Without something like that being relevant to you and your life experience, then why would you want to present it to other people? You say that this is how it works. I mean, it's not us. This is something that we're participating in a bigger way. That's the way I look at it.
I agree.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on was you made some really unique recordings. So in Dragonline Studio, which definitely look at the website and check out all the amazing pictures of what has gone on there, because it is a place you want to be. It feels like one of the things as you talk about the sacred geometry there and how that place was built and the intention of it, when looking at the pictures of Dragonline Studios, I get this feeling of, I want to be there. And when you see things that have happened there, you go, I want to go and do more of that. It really draws people to it. And you made something, it's on SoundCloud, people can listen to it. I'll link to it in the show notes. But you actually, as you put it, Sounds derived from a large granite stone, part of the ancestral home in Jamestown, Rhode Island. Copper leads were affixed to the stone with molten zinc from a thermal arc sprayer, and the stone proved very active that evening, providing us with a long, uninterrupted recording opportunity, especially in the area of 7 to 9 hertz. That seems to be the Schumann resonance. And even a little duende showed up when you were doing this recording. So in listening to that, and I'd inspire people to listen to it, you're actually hearing, well, true rock music. So you can describe what happened, because it's captivating, and when you listen to it, you can hear, not only is it amazing what you're doing and how this is being recorded, but it seemed like it was a magical moment that was recorded.
That's the way it seemed when it was happening. And I have to say that I worked for many years with an electrical engineer and instrument designer named Gordon Salisbury, who was, unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was as hard-nosed old swamp Yankee as you'd ever want to find. Very cynical and not terribly open-minded, right? But he was an excellent electronics engineer and had a lot of experience designing instruments. And when I met him, he was just retiring. So I thought he would be a very good foil for my mystical, open-ended, dreamy kind of existence, to have somebody to ground the experience and to give it a little bit more rigor. So Gordon and I started by trying to reproduce the experiments that Cleve Baxter describes in The Secret Life of Plants, and also some of the other people that are mentioned in that book. There were experimental processes. They had results. They had measurable results. So in the case of Baxter's work, who I was lucky enough to meet at one time and spend an afternoon with in San Diego, he claimed that when he was a lie detector specialist who worked probably for the CIA, and he accidentally or through some process of deduction decided it would be interesting to see what happened when he attached his electrodes to a plant. And what he found is that plants were responding to intention. They were responding to other plants being hurt in their vicinity. They were responding to a wealth of circumstances that could be measured in terms of millivoltages on a meter. So there was a correspondence between what Clive Baxter was testing in his laboratory and what he was seeing on the meter. So if he had a plant hooked up to an instrument, a lie detector, and he poured shrimp into boiling water, the effect of those shrimp instantaneously dying would show up like a scream on the voltage meter of the plant. So this is a one-to-one correspondence. And he wrote extensively about this. I don't need to recreate his own words. But we saw this as a way, aside from the sacred geometry, we wanted to go more into the experimental side of subtle energy and try to find out what we could about it through experimentation. So Gordon was open to this, and we began experimenting, recreating these techniques. And Gordon designed what first was a rate of change converter, which measures fluctuation of voltage, could be static. Then he got more sophisticated. We had a series of instruments that he designed to try to narrow down our comprehension of the signals that we were seeing. And in the end, we met a very interesting inventor named Masahiro Kahata, who created the IBVA, which was a brainwave analysis hardware software package, very similar to what Clive Baxter had done with the plants, except that Masahiro's device created a visual display, which meant that it's a floating graph with many different frequencies and how the signal was appearing. Let's say you could assign it from, let's say, up to 30 hertz, which is very low frequency, but it's the area in which the brain does its activity. It also happens to be the area in which the plants do their activity. So when you hook up to a plant, now Masahiro gave us the capacity to see a three-dimensional, or at least appeared to be three-dimensional rendering of a lot of different frequencies reacting at the same time to any given stimulus, whatever you attach the instrument to. So we started with plants because we were working with plants. But I also came upon the work of Townsend Brown, who was an early figures very heavily into anti-gravity research. He was in the clandestine side. He was also a scientist who worked in aerospace industry in a number of different ways. But he had a great interest in rock electricity. And we found that certain forms of rock, certain types of rocks have their own, what's called a petrovoltaic charge. They exhibit electrical output, which you can measure. So you can actually put a voltmeter in the millivolt range on certain rocks and get a voltage reading as the rock is producing voltage, not static, which is what the electrical voltage is around the rock. This is coming from within the rock. It was important to differentiate the two. So we built instruments. Gordon built instruments, and we did tests. And what we found with Masahiro's equipment and with some other earlier stuff we did is that we could take voltages, translate voltages into pitch. That's pitch, right? So the voltage you see as going up and down on a meter can be turned into pitch. Once you have pitch, you can take a complex musical algorithm and input the pitch into the algorithm, and the algorithm will instrumentalize it. It will turn it into, it'll orchestrate it. You can assign it to an individual instrument, or you can assign it to a program of electronic instruments. And this is where we began to attract the musicians and the composers that were looking for novel ways of creating musical compositions beyond just their own brain and their computers. So what does a sampling of rock do for you? Well, or a plant. It gives you a musical input that is non-human, and yet it is creative. We found that the plants, and lesser extent the rocks, would sometimes play along with music, not necessarily always in harmony, but there was a mimicking process going on. Now, do I know what this is scientifically? I have no clue. All I can say is that we experienced it, and we experienced many other moments of intense wonder as we saw what appeared to be plants and rocks communicating with us sonically and interacting with us according to how we touched them, or what we played for them musically, or how we exposed them to creativity in their environment. And we did this for years, and it was utterly compelling work. So that's what brought people in. And on top of that, we were developing music listening devices. The genesis that was the creation of Michael Bradford, who became a good friend of ours and collaborator. He had created this large cube octahedron form with a bed in it. And the bed had sensors under the bed, and it had speakers under the bed and above the bed, and that he was able to sample electricity, static electricity from the body, do the same thing that we were doing with the plants, except taking your own energy, turning it, assigning it an instrument, and then feeding it back to you. So if you lay in this chamber, you could listen to your own energetic process musically, according to how accurately this was done by his electronics. So we were approaching this field of subtle energy from the vantage point of, where does it come from in a plant or a rock? How does it express itself? How can it be rendered or enhanced so that the plant becomes the creator, it becomes the performer, and it becomes the collaborator, as well as the subject of our own investigation? It's kind of a wider view of the creative process that you get involved with when you begin to participate with the signals coming out of plants and rocks. And then we were trying to see how can we take these sounds and open up our own minds, use frequencies directed into these chambers to give our listening experience more bandwidth. You see, so you're taking a signal from somewhere and you're trying to enhance your capacity to hear it all at the same time. And that's what was going on up in that room for many years that you've seen pictures of.
Hmm. And that was the
I know that's a lot to take in. I hope I'm not overdoing it.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
And that was the purr generator, I believe. Is that what you called it?
The purr generator was a device that was continually being hacked. It began as the Baytar, which was an invention of a radionic genius named Peter Kelly, who taught me a lot about radionics, gave me instructions in radionics. And his son still operates his company in Lakemont, Georgia. But for a long time, Peter was also working with sound, and he had got this sound equipment from another inventor named Michael Bradford. So Peter hacked Michael Bradford's invention, the Genesis, and turned it into the Baytar. It had different components, different structure, but it still had the cube octahedron form. And there's a whole story behind this geometry. Again, we're back to doing this in a specific geometry, which plays a role in the way the human ingests this information. So Peter was aware of that. Michael was aware of that. And the late Josh Reynolds bought this device from Kelly and installed it in my apartment in New York. And from there, we began inviting people over to experience these sound journeys with this device. And of course, inventors came. And with the inventors, they wanted to change it. They wanted to hack it and bring their own element to it. So it went through all these revisions until it wound up in my studio. And at that point, Gordon wanted to do his own hack. And that's what the purr generator was. The purr generator was taking this device and building an electronic simulation of the cat's purr, which you can move by dials. In other words, there are many levels of a cat's purr.
I think it's here in the book. I think you actually have
that's the cube octahedron on the left, and the dial on the right was the way we manipulated the cat's purr. So a person could lie on that bed, and I know you can't see it very well, but a person could lie on this bed in this sound chamber, and as they move those dials, the purr frequencies would change. So you have all these nested frequencies. Well, cats are known for their 9 lives, which means they use frequency to restore their bodies from bad falls and various other environmental disasters that they put themselves through. The purring helped with that. So at one point, I had a hip replacement, and I could go into the purr generator, lie down in a state of pain from this replaced hip being suddenly put in my body. And instead of taking a narcotic, I could adjust the purr dials on that machine so that it completely neutralized the pain I was experiencing in my hip. In other words, it soothed it. It gave it relief, right? And now techniques like this are being used on the battlefield to keep soldiers with terrible injuries from getting addicted to narcotics, right? That they're alternatives to just chemical bombardment of the system and dumbing you down to the point where you have you are now dependent upon a chemical in order to relieve yourself of a bodily pain. This stuff is coming awake in many contexts that you would least expect it. But I experienced that myself. And that was because Gordon went to the trouble of creating this amazing rendition of the music machine. We took all the music out, all the other stuff we took off, and we just put that one thing on it. And in the end, we put it on display. It went to the Museum of Visionary Art in Baltimore through the through a great friend had organized a show there of visionary art, and he wanted this included in the show. And then from there it came back to the museum, the Gregg Museum at NC State, and it was there for about a year, and students were using it like a wishing well that you could insert, like in radionics, you have an input well, you put a request in the input well, and then you have your radionic treatment, which is supposed to fulfill that request. It's like a wishing well, right? So yes. Roger Manley, who is this wonderful individual and a visionary himself, who runs the museum at NC State, the Gregg Museum, got this device, saw the potential of this device, put it in a show in the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, and then brought it back to his own museum and let the students there play with it for the next year. So we wound up with this huge basket full of wishes of all the people who had used this device. They would put the wish in the wishing well, then they push the button, and the purr generator would go on, and as they lay on the bed, that would be the radionic transaction that hopefully enabled them to achieve what they were trying to do. So it was fun. At this point, it wasn't heavy radionics. This is like radionics light, but it was accessible to people, and it gave them a sense of empowerment, just like what I was saying, that yes, you can do something to help yourself beyond what other people tell you you have to do. You can do something for yourself that you will create. And that was where a lot of this stuff led. So I don't know, this must sound terribly confusing.
Oh, no, not at all. No. It sounds about normal to us. So.
Yeah.
So that's what was going on in this environment at Dragonline for about 15 years, while I was also working in other parts of the studio as a glass artist. And having guests come in and raising a family and all sorts of other good things. So it was an experience that my family enjoyed, my children enjoyed. It spread out to our friends. It spread out from there to other interested parties, and it just became a phenomena for a while. But in the end, I had to shut it all down.
Oh, does the purge generator still exist there?
Oh yeah, it's still there. It's just mothballed.
Oh,
We have two of them. We have two of them. We have one that I described that was in the show, which is a simplified version of the first one, which had a lot more control by the user.
Mm.
So yes, and this was Gordon's legacy to us, that he left these machines. I'm not sure what to do with them now. In fact,
Bring them to our house.
Yeah, send one to Scottsdale.
I'm trying to. I have all these historical radionics devices, and plus all the stuff we made ourselves, and the IBVA and everything else, and I'm at a loss as to what to do with it at this point.
Yeah, and if you go to duncanlaurie.com and you look at all the pictures, it is a picture-centric site. You can see the amazing music composition and experiments that were done there, so you actually can see the stuff, what was going on, and it's phenomenal. I mean, to me personally,
thanks to Todd Thill, our third leg of the stool. Right? Todd was the one who really made this all presentable for other people through the book and through his care in the book. You know, it's easy to self-publish a book. We didn't self-publish this, by the way. It's published, but he made the book aesthetically rigorous and did the same thing for our website. And this is what I talk about media, the creative use of media for other people. I mean, this is his specialty. This is what he did. This is what he does for other people. And in my case, he took all this random information and all these various lines of inquiry and put it up there for people to see, and continues to add stories to our own blog that relate to our own experiences, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is what I'm very grateful for, that I had this experience with these two individuals and with Steve and with many other people who came across our path.
And the music is there, it's recorded. So you go to duncanlaurie.com. You've got a good deal of stuff on SoundCloud and even something on YouTube. So the music that was created, literally rock music that was created, it's well described. And I really recommend people listen to it because, I don't know, you'll get it. If you listen to it, it will move you. It speaks for itself. It tells you what it is. And I have a feeling. Oh no! It's amazing. Oh my gosh! You know, I would love to actually, in future versions of our intro, actually work some of that in. It would be amazing. Well, I have a feeling that the purge generator and some of your other radionics equipment, because when you look at pictures of your site, well, pictures of your Dragonline studio on the site, you see the classic radionics equipment, and that must have been that must have been years of collecting to get some of the amazing stuff that you've got. And I don't know, I have a feeling it's going to get unmothballed because it ain't over yet. We're coming over. So.
All right, good. You come to Rhode Island, we'll dig it all out.
Oh,
better be ready to spend some time now. Fortunately, we got all those machines so Gordon could bench test them all. We wanted to find out how they were made, what they were made of, what they did, why they did what they did or didn't do what they didn't do. You know, we looked at it very critically. But as a result, I've got some extraordinary devices lying around.
Yes, yeah, they're amazing. So I do hope that, you know, I will tell you, I think that the crazy people are heading east at some point, and we'll come see you and help break those things out of the crate because.
Okay, sounds good. Better be careful what you wish for.
I always am.
That's for sure true.
Oh, goodness.
We have a nice segment up here in Maine where I am now on the website too. You can see some pictures of this whole thing done in a very primitive context, which we have this is a beautiful environment for it. I'm thinking of bringing it all up here. So
I've been up there. It is very beautiful.
Oh, it's amazing.
I learned about quahogs. Is that what you call them?
Quahogs.
Quahogs. See, I still don't say it right.
Free food in the ocean, in the sand, right? We have those in Rhode Island too. Very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Well, Duncan Laurie, it's been amazing talking to you. Thanks for doing part 2.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You've given me tremendous pleasure allowing me to share these ideas with people and your audience and your friends, and I appreciate it very much. It's not easy to get this kind of attention for these topics, and you're marvelous to be able to afford people that.
Wow. Well, that's the best compliment ever. So we appreciate you even more. So
yeah. And thank you for helping unlock me and some of my artist friends as well. So
yeah, keep me posted.
I will.
Oh, we will.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
Yes. Nice meeting you as well.
Great. Thank you for reaching out.
Oh, thank you for responding. And we look forward to part 3. Maybe it will be in person. So be careful what you wish for.
All right. So if we do part 3, we'll do it in the lab.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well,
all right. Beautiful.
Scheduled. Okay. Take
right.
care.
Right. Take care.
Thank
Good
you
night.
very much. Good night.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A radiant creator isn't making a living, they are living.